This is Laura Cross of Rebel Seed Studio from Military Dispatch. You're listening to a bonus episode of the audio documentary Battlefield Fallujah. This episode features Captain Joe Winslow, a Marine and historian who was embedded with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines during the Second Battle of Fallujah in November 2004.
My background, I'm a retired Marine Major, and I retired in 2008. Retired from the History and Museums Division after serving there for several years as an artifact officer and a historical officer for that division. And we had two roles there. One was to deploy to combat zones with assault infantry units and observe what they did with them, and then gather artifacts and official histories of that action. So that would involve, in my case, deploying with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines to Iraq during the Battle of Fallujah, and then accompanying them in battle, witnessing their efforts, and then spending months and really years then documenting and formatting what they did for the History and Museums Division. So for the History Division, we would gather oral histories and documents from these Marines. For the Museum Division, it would be gathering artifacts. And when I say artifacts, I'm not talking about the gold head from Indiana Jones, where you go into the cave and you fight off the aliens and the Nazis and you get the gold head from the ancient shrine. What we're talking about here is after you had been made aware or witnessed a heroic act that some Marine was going to get a Navy Cross or a Medal of Valor for or a Medal of Honor, you then have to be there to record who that person was and record the different rifles or the different weapons he used, the different helicopters or tanks or supporting instruments that were used in that particular mission, and indeed even you could have his uniform and other things. And the purpose of that is to be able to display in the museum system, 2, 3, 10, 20 years later, you can say this rifle, this tank, this uniform, this MRE spoon was used by Private Smith in this particular action in Fallujah during that day. And so that would be the point of the artifact collection. And then the history collection is to actually record first person, as close as to the event as possible, the impressions and the thoughts and the feelings, a lot of times, of these Marines as they accomplish those actions. So my role to collect that was to be with them in the assault and to participate in that as I could and watch it and understand it, and then talk to them immediately afterwards, either that night or immediately afterwards on tape and by paper about what they did and why they did it and how they did it. And they ended up sharing how they felt about it and recording all that on paper and on a recording, and then that in turn gets sent to the History Division, and the History Division records that in the archives. And so 20, 30, 40 years from now, somebody can say, gee, I wonder what Private Smith was thinking when he assaulted that enemy position on Phase Line Henry on the 4th day of the battle. And that person can then go and they can listen to that recording when it's released and read that transcript that I had produced, and they can say, oh, okay, that's the first person information on that. It was really just an incredible career for me. I spent 4 years there and loved every minute of it, to be honest with you. The challenges for me gathering those histories and those artifacts was the enemy shooting at us and rocketing us. 3-5 was incredibly supportive of my efforts. They welcomed me into the battalion like nobody's business and gave me free rein to meander around the battalion and to be a part of anything that I wanted to be a part of. The challenge was not mobility or being in the right spot. The challenge was just being with them and trying to balance being in the battalion and not getting in the way of some of the Marines there, because they'll all tell you they want you, but when you're in an assault or you're taking a position or taking enemy fire, they don't need an untrained guy like me out there in front as a captain doing anything. I'm fully armed. I've got a rifle. I'm using it when I need to, but everything they're doing is highly choreographed. They're operating as teams. They know what they're doing. They're doing it a certain way with their particular operations in mind, and I was not part of the training on that process. I didn't get sent there as an infantryman. I was sent there as a historian to record it. I'm fully armed with the whole thing. I look just like they do. You couldn't pick me out of the crowd. I'm a Marine Corps. I'm an active duty Marine Corps captain, fully armed Marine Corps captain in battle with them. Most of the Marines I spoke with and spent time with were lance corporals through staff sergeants. I didn't spend a lot of time with the officers, a little bit of time here and there, but the young Marines were the ones doing the fighting, and that's where I needed to be at the time. Did I have a sense of how they felt? Absolutely, because a lot of these Marines I interviewed 2 or 3 times before. I interviewed them in California, then interviewed them because they were kind of getting into it in Iraq, and then as they were in battle, and then after battle, and then a couple years later would deploy out and meet with them or follow up with them, talking to them, years later. Going in, a lot of them had experience on the march up, but they didn't have the full-on assault experience where they were going to be taking a whole city and moving through a whole city. So they were very confident moving up and being in Iraq and having done a couple deployments since the War on Terror started. So they all had some kind, but they all knew this was going to be much more of an urban, much more of a denser, longer, brutal fight. So they were going in supremely confident. They were going in with some experience under the belt, but they knew it was going to be different. And they all, like all good Marines do, they wonder if they're going to be up to the task. And then they think about it, and they come up with ways to address that, more training or more information or more research. They were ready for it. They were ready for it, and they knew it, but knew it was going to be tough, for sure. A long-standing tradition of the Marine Corps is exactly what Task Force Bruno was doing. So Task Force Bruno, under Major Todd DeGrossier, he was the executive officer of 35. He put together a task force of probably 20 or 30 Marines, but these are all the Marines who are not classically trained infantry Marines. These are the cooks, bakers, and candlestick makers, and I use that very specifically. That's a saying in the Corps that at some point, even the cooks, bakers, and candlestick makers are going to be on the front line. And you see that in World War II, you see that in Korea, and you see that in Vietnam, and indeed, it was brought to bear in Fallujah, too, of a true formation of supply and service Marines taking up arms and moving forward as an assault unit to get it done. And it speaks to the Marine Corps' ethos of every Marine is a rifleman. Every Marine knows how to use that rifle and will at some point be called upon to use that rifle, and that's how we train them. And that's the great story of Task Force Bruno. Besides their heroism and their bravery, in particular, one action towards the end, it's where Todd got the Silver Star, and many of his Marines were decorated. They took it to the enemy, and they stuck it to him in a meaningful way with a lot of casualties on both sides. Task Force Bruno, in a lot of ways, it really talks about what the Marine Corps is all about. Todd DeGrossier, that guy is incredible. Incredible. I can't say enough about him. He's just lethal, a leader, capable, above the norm Marine leader who did everything he could to kill bad guys and take care of his Marines. Absolutely unbelievable. And it was a combination of him and Lieutenant Colonel Pat Millay, who is the CO, who is truly a gunfighter. That man is a gunfighter. He believes in using his weapons to kill as many people as possible in the most violent means possible, and he trained his Marines to do the same with the mindset and the skill. So him with Major Todd DeGrossier, lethal combination, 3-5, all the way through the city. Those guys are just slitting throats, not literally, that's metaphorically, but going through and raining death and destruction down upon the enemy. And I don't use that facetiously. I'm being very literal. Comparing urban and non-urban battles, a good illustration here is Band of Brothers. So they have some urban fighting in Band of Brothers in some villages, but they're also assaulting across fields and across, through the forest and out of the tree line and all that kind of stuff, where you have to gut it up, run towards something, assault it. You can take a breather, think about it, reconsolidate, and then move on to somewhere else. But in the city, you're literally going from one door, crossing the street. You've got to take down that door. You've got to clear that building, kill the people inside, reduce the building, and then fight off guys that are in the building next to you. Do the same thing, regroup, move across the other building, open it, destroy it, kill the people inside of it, reduce the guys shooting from the next building. It's just over and over and over again. It is extremely, extremely exhausting. When I was in there, at times I felt like this is a little bit of combat, but it's a whole lot of construction work. This is like working a construction job while you're getting shot at and you're trying to shoot people. It's really like working construction work in the biggest, grimiest site in New York City, but doing that under just truly life-threatening conditions. Tremendous amount of physical exertion and exhaustion over weeks and weeks and weeks. That's what these guys were doing. It's really a testament to their fitness. It's amazing. What's important here, what you really need to realize about the Battle of Fallujah, Operation Phantom Fury, is just the size of the city and the scale of the operation. It's a very, very densely populated city with a lot of concrete structures. The city is built entirely of concrete. There is no wood. It's not like a suburb of Washington, D.C., where everything's wood. This is a concrete city. It's huge. It's got back alleyways. It's got pavements. It's got basements. It's got rooftops. It's got sewers. It's got paved streets. It's got unpaved streets. This is a major city that's densely populated with a ton of places for people to hide and for insurgents to build fighting positions in. It's just amazing how dense it is. It's about moving material, moving around material, climbing over material, going under material, blowing up material, building material. It's really, really, really about the concrete in that city and getting around it and fighting through it and going over it. The city is a couple miles wide and a couple miles deep, and some of those alleyways and streets are only 6 feet wide or 7 feet wide. So if you multiply that across a city that's 2 miles by 2 miles, that's a tremendous amount of spaces that you have to go through and clear. And the Marines went through and cleared almost every single room and every single building in the entire city by the time it was done. In some cases, like Task Force Bruno, under Major Todd DeGrossier, they went back and forth 3 times and just in their zone to back clear all the fighting positions behind the battalions. When you have a city of this size and it's this dense and it's this indestructible with concrete and steel doors, that in itself lends itself to requirements. You have to blow the door or kick in the door, have an engineer in to blow down a wall. But that's all predicated on the fact that after you do that, you've got to go in there. You've got to go in there. You've got absolutely no idea what's in that building. You may have some intel report. You may have some idea based on scan eagle imagery or something like that of who's around, but you really don't know what is behind that door. And it's all about these 19 to 20-year-old men who've made the decision, I'm just going to kick in the door and I'm okay. I've been trained. Yes, I'm concerned about what's behind the door, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to just do it because it's my job here and I'm going to get it done, and they make that decision. That split-second decision to do it despite what might be there because it's got to be done, that's the essence of these guys. That's the essence of these Marines who do it, who just make the decision and they get it done. Despite the risk, despite the threat of death, they just do it. That's the essence of the fighting men and kicking down those doors because you don't know what's there. And then you get through the door and you got to do another one inside the house. You got to go through the kitchen and you got to turn the corner in the living room or to the other room and see what's in there. And then you got to do it again to the next room. And then you got to go up the stairs. And you got to make the decision to go up the stairs. And you know there's somebody upstairs. And you can't fire through the stairs. But those decisions to proceed under those conditions made without hesitation is the essence of the whole thing. That millisecond decision consciously made and acted upon, repeated hundreds of thousands of times to find what this was all about. There's a direct relationship between the violence of the level of the encounter with the duration of the assault. What that practically means is that in the beginning, they were effectively wiping out all the rookies and opportunists. So the first 3 or 4 days were all the rookies and opportunists who were there either because they wanted to get involved in the game but didn't know what they were doing, or they were being paid to be there, or they were being there because their friend was there. In other words, it sounded good and it was a chance for some glory, but they didn't have any idea what they were doing. All those guys got rounded up or killed in the first few days. Then you had some of the professionals who were coming around, who were probably from the area, who were former regime elements, who were more trained, who had familiarity, who may have even fought against Americans before or been involved in the effort. They were all either captured or killed towards the middle of the assault. That was a heavier fight. And then you had the last third of the fight where you had the 18 players. These are first-round draft picks. These are fighters who are coming in from other countries who are professionals. They are there for Allah and for the glory, and they know how to get it done, and they're going to make it happen. They are going to kill some Americans or they're going to die trying, and they know it, and they mean it, and they did it. So in your spectrum of fights, the easier fights were up front, a little harder in the beginning, and a lot harder towards the end, where you had those guys shooting up and doing everything they could to stay in the fight. That's your assault violence continuum in Fallujah. On the heels of these engagements, I would spend time in the dark in a burned-out building with rocket fire coming in or sniper fire, and we'd been fighting all day, and I'd be sitting there with an individual Marine, and I'm asking him about him and what he's doing and what he's been up to, and he tells me a little bit about that, but then they all immediately, every single Marine immediately transfers the credit and the accolades to somebody else, to that young Marine who was working with him that he had trained, or to a leader that took him through it. Just a tremendous sense of appreciation for the comradeship and the leadership and the followership of the Marines around him. that was conveyed through either immense pride with these Marines, or it was conveyed through tears, or it was conveyed through just endless streams of adjectives, positive adjectives. And it was really pretty amazing. The actual incident that I remember the most, we were north of the city, and it was about 10 o'clock at night, and we were receiving rocket fire, and it was coming in, and it was impacting all around us. And at that time, I remember thinking, this might be it for me. This is it. I'm done. There's nothing more we can do here. I've trained for 15 years. I'm with some of the most lethal 23-year-olds on the planet. They're surrounding me here. We've done all kinds of training, but you know what? That one rocket might come in the window, might take me out. There's nothing I can do about it. And quite frankly, it's when I said, you know what? I think this whole thing's out of my hands. And I got a tremendous sense of peace from that. It was truly a come to Jesus kind of moment. Me personally, that was my watershed moment there, where I realized I'm just in it right now. I got to do what I need to do with these guys and do the best I can, because I have no control over what's going to happen next. None at all. And at that moment, I realized, that we can get it done. You just got to keep doing it until you get it done. Just keep doing it. Most of the Marines in the fight were overwhelmingly Catholic or Protestant, and they were from Texas and from California. Most of these Marines were on their first deployment, and most of them had been in the Corps for under 3 years. Most of these are working-class young men. So what that means is they've got 3 or 4 months of boot camp, then they've got 3 months of individual infantry training, then they've got advanced infantry training, and then they got workups, and then they have the actual mission or the actual deployment, which is 18 to 24 months. So that means it's their first fight. For most of these guys, it's their first fight. It's their very first fight. And you might think, well, it takes somebody more experienced to do a mission like Fallujah. We need trained veterans who have been around and have been fighting for 10 or 15, 20 years. But we didn't. The Marine Corps produced this fighting force in the form of 2 regiments who came in there, and they absolutely kicked ass in a devastating manner across the board. They executed a textbook assault that was absolutely lethal and ruthless, and they were all from young men who'd come from working-class backgrounds in their first fight who did not have a college degree. That is exactly the same demographic as World War II and Korea and Vietnam. The first thing that America needs to know is that these young men, they have successfully grabbed the flag from America's greatest generation, and they're moving forward with it. This is America's new greatest generation. These are average young men and young women who come from all across America, all different colors and all different religions, and they're getting it done. And they're not getting it done for some lofty goal. They're doing it just for our country, and they know there's going to be hard work and perseverance and dedication, and they're willing to do it at the risk of their own lives. So anybody who thinks that we're losing it or we're lost or we're astray as a country, we're not. We've still got what it takes, and we've communicated that to the rest of the world. I think Fallujah at the time said to all these countries and to all these factions who thought we were fat and lazy and liked to play Nintendo, that we couldn't field those people anymore. We couldn't field that kind of fighting force. Well, I think it reminded them all that we could, and we will, and we can, and we'll do it again. America still has what it takes to put some people in the field that will kick your ass if you poke at them too much. Without a doubt, every single Marine I did probably over 300 interviews from privates to colonels, and without a doubt, it was a different experience than they expected. They came out of it with a different impression and a different feeling about being in battle and being in the assault than they went in with it. It was much more personal, and it was much more completely and totally personally involving than they had ever thought. It made a very, very serious impression on everybody who was involved. And not a single Marine came out of that battle unaffected in a positive or negative way, having been through battle. That's just all there is to it. Some of them came out with extreme joy and extreme pride. Some of them came out with an extreme sense of accomplishment. Some of them came out with profound amounts of regret and sadness gained through the death of their comrades or through what they've experienced. But there was no middle ground. You could classify the reactions as either on one end of the spectrum or the other. I do a lot of transition, a lot of support with veterans now. I think there's the professional and the personal. You've got 2 distinct categories on what you take away and what you work with when you get out. On the professional side, I believe this wholeheartedly, that Marines get out with the professional skills they have and the self-discipline and just the attention to detail. I think should they avail themselves of those skill sets, they are uniquely positioned to excel and achieve anything they want in the world and in their professional life. The ability to look at a situation, think about it, the ability to act the ability to engender action, the ability to take orders, the ability to listen, the ability to get something done, to be accountable, show up on time. And the longer I'm around, the longer I realize that that's really the only things that matter, right, is being in the game, showing up on time, being a team player. Now, the personal side is I think you come out of that and you're, me, myself included, being in combat and being in that environment, it's the greatest drug in the world. Combat and war makes heroin and PCP and all that kind of stuff child's play. It is the most terrifying and the most exhilarating thing you'll ever do all at once in your entire lifetime. The Marines, and myself included, you are fully involved mentally, physically, and emotionally in every single minute of every single instance, and you will never replicate that on the outside. Never. You will never replicate what you experienced in Fallujah, in battle, in close combat. You will never replicate that. So I think a lot of Marines still look for that, and they still think back on that, and they still think that's to be found somewhere. But at some point, you have to say that's over. You have to say that's not going to happen anymore. You have to find ways to address it or find new meaning in life, and that's a difficult, difficult struggle that has to be done personally and by yourself with effort. And if you're not willing to do it, then you're not going to get past it, but you have to do the work and the hard graft to actually make the transition.